All working now, I understand.
I understand the same. Could we go back to having paragraph 299, thank you, on the screen? Mr. MacLeod, I was in the middle of reading paragraph 299A, so I will carry on doing that to assist your recollection. So you're talking about the buddy-buddy mentoring scheme, and I'll pick up about halfway through the paragraph. I can only remember HN 68. He would provide a shoulder for any officer who was going through difficult times. HN 68 was an exceptional man in many ways. When you get people, when you get people like that who have the respect of the troops, you can be confident they will actually turn to him. He was a very kind person. They would have had a telephone number for him. So, other than having the telephone number for, as it were, a trustworthy and respected former undercover officer, did the buddy-buddy scheme consist of anything else?
Not in the time that I was there.
And was the onus on the undercover officer to telephone HN 68, or was there an expectation that HN 68 would proactively intervene or make inquiries of the undercover officers?
I think I'm not sure, to be certain.
Other than, again, be careful not to use names, but other than HN 68, do you remember any other officers acting in that role during the time that you were with the SDS?
No, there weren't.
But would it follow that there may have come a time when other officers took up that role?
I would expect them to, yes.
And was there any assessment made, as far as you were aware, of the qualities of the officer acting in that mentorship role, and whether they were suitable to do so?
Well, I guess you'd only know that when they're in situ.
But let's take an example, given what's known now about the conduct of Bob Lambert whilst he was undercover, and bearing in mind his admitted conduct, not just what's alleged. If he were to become a mentor to undercover officers, might that not be a problem? In the sense that he might be perpetuating behaviours that you don't approve of?
No, I accept that.
But as far as you were concerned, nothing was done to make an assessment in advance of whether somebody would be a suitable mentor or buddy?
No.
Can I ask you about, I came to this whilst asking you questions about looking out for officer welfare. And in your witness statement, you also say that you would look for signs of stress amongst the officers. Do you remember saying that?
Yes, I do.
And you would do that, would you, by observing them at the weekly meetings?
Yes, that's the only opportunity I would have.
And so would you agree that it might depend on knowing the undercover officers quite well to be able to spot signs of stress in that way?
Yes, I think it would.
And how confident did you feel in your ability to spot signs of stress in the officers under your command?
The thing is, it's not that easy to detect unless there's some manifestly obvious behaviour. There's no way of knowing.
You were only in post for about 10 months in total on the SDS.
Yes, that's right.
Did you consider that that was long enough to get to know the undercover officers under your command for the purposes of assessing stress or competence?
No, I don't think it was long enough.
And so if you had to reflect on the tenure, the sort of appropriate or desirable length of tenure for someone managing an undercover unit like that, would you say that 10 months probably wasn't long enough?
Correct.
Other than in relation to being able to spot signs of officers struggling with welfare issues, was there any other respect in which the shortness of your time in the role you think impacted your ability to manage the unit?
No, I can't think.
Can I turn to ask you some questions about Mike Chitty? I've mentioned him already today. If we could turn up, please, paragraph 297 of your witness statement, page 171. And you were shown, when giving your witness statement, a psychiatric report post-dating Mike Chitty's deployment, which described him as, quote, psychologically unsuited to this type of work. And you said this: I agree with this observation, though I find it difficult to substantiate now because my memory of him is so limited. This was an observation that I had at the time and shared with Eric Docker. We had some concerns, but I cannot now recall the substance. I did not trust him, but cannot tell you now why that was. I did not provide him with any emotional supervision and or support during his deployment. I am not sure whether Tony Waite did or not. And then if we can turn, please, to paragraph 305, page 176 to 77. You also said of him in your statement to the inquiry, Mr. MacLeod, this: in my Operation Hearn interview, I describe how I did not feel comfortable in the presence of Mike Chitty. I find it difficult to explain this. See paragraph 297 above. To pause, that's the one I just read through to you. It's not something you can easily pinpoint. The word shifty comes to mind. There are some people who you take a liking to and others you do not. Perhaps we can call this a copper's instinct. Does it follow from all that I've read that at the time you were in post, you found Mike Chitty to be shifty, to use your word there?
Yeah.
And in your statement, you said there was nothing you can easily pinpoint. Does that remain the case?
Yes.
So no incident that, in particular, that came to your attention that led you to that conclusion?
No, just an intuition.
Did that intuition lead you to take any steps at all in relation to his supervision?
No, no.
On reflection, might it have?
Yes.
And at the time you were in post, his deployment was coming to an end, so he was withdrawing during the time that you were in post.
Yes.
Do you recall that he was at that stage of his deployment?
Yes.
Did you take any steps, for example, to bring forward his withdrawal?
No, I didn't.
Was that because whatever your intuition told you, you weren't concerned enough to take those steps, or because it didn't occur to you that you could take those steps?
It didn't occur to me we could have taken these steps. I was coming to the conclusion of his tenure, his posting. We'd have let it run.
Would it be fair to say that overall you didn't trust Mike Chitty as an officer? Or was it not quite as strong as that?
It's difficult to put your finger on it. It's just police officer's intuition. I wouldn't put it any stronger than that.
But looking back, I mean, you've described the role that these officers performed. They're out in the field. They're relatively unsupervised, aren't they, compared to other special branch roles?
Indeed.
And so you had an officer who you felt was shifty and that you were uncomfortable around. Did it not occur to you to take any steps, perhaps to make inquiries to see what he was doing in his deployment, or implement any closer supervision of him at all?
No, I suppose my comments are based on what I was told about his behaviour.
Do you mean told at the time or told subsequently?
Subsequently, yeah.
So there's an element of retrospective analysis, is there?
There is.
But nonetheless, at the time, you didn't feel comfortable in his presence. Is that still the case?
No, that's a fair comment.
So you've put together an intuition at the time and what you've learned subsequently about his behaviour to come to some conclusions. Is that right?
That's right.
You also say elsewhere in your witness statement that if Mr. Chitty didn't get post-deployment counselling, he should have done. I can bring it up if it assists you. Would you like to see it on the screen?
Yes, please.
All right, paragraph 318, page 181. Right, so there's a summary of an interview Mr. Chitty had with Operation Hearn, describing that he received no aftercare or counselling, and about halfway down there you say, I cannot honestly remember if he got any counselling. If he did not, he should have. Do you see that?
Yes.
What caused you to say that he should have received post-deployment counselling?
There must have been a very good reason for it, but right now I cannot recollect.
Are you able to assist as to whether that's something that occurred to you at the time or something which has occurred to you subsequently, having learnt about what he was doing in his deployment?
I think it's what he, retrospectively.
When you were the Detective Chief Inspector of the unit, do you recall whether officers were asked at the end of their deployment to return the documentation they held in their cover identities?
That's a given. I would expect that to be the case.
Are you aware now that Mike Chitty appears to have retained at least a driving licence and continued to use his cover identity after his deployment had concluded?
I only discovered that after the fact.
Do you have any reflection on the fact that he appears to have either been permitted to or gotten away with retaining cover identity documents at the end of his deployment?
Yes, I'm just shocked.
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
I'm shocked that he did.
You're shocked that he did? That he retained them, or that he retained them and used them? Or both?
That he may have used them.
Did you take or put in place any steps to monitor whether or not officers returned their cover documents, or was it just assumed that they would do so?
I think it was assumed that he would have done.
And even in the case of somebody like Mike Chitty, who your intuition told you to be a bit wary of?
If it was so close to his removal from the unit, then probably not.
Can I ask you, I'll come back to the specifics of Mr. Chitty's deployment a little later. Can I ask you now about Stefan Scott? I appreciate you've said your recollection of him is hazy, but I want to ask you about some specific documents from the time. Could we start, please, by looking at MPS 0746943, page 4. And can we zoom in on the text at the bottom of the page, please? Mr. MacLeod, this is an AQR, so a review signed off by Eric Docker in April of 1987. So you were in post, but this is not your document. But you'll see there that Eric Docker wrote in April 1987 that Scott was a thoroughly sound and practical officer, ideally suited to his present duty, where his qualities of initiative, self-discipline and experience are put to excellent use, and then consistently produces work of the very highest quality. And in the second paragraph there, the conclusion is that he's an ideal candidate for higher rank. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Are you able to say whether those sentiments, those descriptions, are ones that you agreed with or not?
I'm not sure. I would say no.
And when you say no, is that because of what you've learnt subsequently, or at the time you would have said you don't agree?
What I learnt subsequently.
At the time, do you recall disagreeing with Eric Docker about the assessment of Stefan Scott at this point in time?
I can't honestly remember discussing this with Eric.
Is it possible you might not have discussed it and left him to do this by himself?
I think that's probably what happened. I can't actually remember this.
Right, let's take that down. Can we put onto the screen, please, UCPI 024603. It's your B17, sir. Can we zoom in on everything below the line, the content of the letter? So this is dated the 16th of July 1987 when you were in post, Mr. MacLeod. It's marked for your attention and dear Malcolm, and it covers a thank you note, to put it shortly, from the security service to you for a meeting with HN95. Do you recall a letter of thanks being received from the security service in connection with a meeting with HN95?
No.
Does it surprise you at all that they might have sent a letter of thanks in connection with his deployment?
I don't know.
Can we take that down, please, and put up on screen UCPI 022281? So it's your B33B. And can we have page 2, please? In fact, sorry, let's put on page 1 so that you can see, Mr. MacLeod, what it is we're looking at. It's about a security service visit to the SDS on the 16th of September of 1987. And so that it's clear to you, paragraph 2 records that you were not present at this meeting. Right, so Eric Docker handled the meeting on this occasion with the security service. But can I just ask you about what's said at the bottom of page 2 there about HN95? The very bottom, thank you. It records that he has 2 years to go and continues to do very well. Does that assessment of Mr. Scott continuing to do very well accord with what recollection you have of him as an undercover officer?
No, from my recollection, I'm not sure I'd agree with that.
And again, is that because of what you've learned subsequently rather than at the time?
I learned subsequently.
Would you have agreed at the time?
I don't know.
Do you recall any issues with Stefan Scott or his deployment during your time in charge of the unit?
I remember there were issues, but I can't remember specifically what these issues were.
But do you recall those happening whilst you were the Detective Chief Inspector of the unit?
Yes.
Do you agree, certainly from the documents we've looked at, the review in April 1987 and the contact with the security service in July and September 1987, there doesn't appear to be any indication on the paperwork from the time of there being any issues with Stefan Scott's deployment?
No, I can't comment.
If we have a look at some other documentation from the first half of 1987, let's see if we can jog any memory that you might have. UCPI 024630, it's your B8, sir. And if we could look at the first paragraph to start with, please. Mr. MacLeod, this is a security service note of a meeting that took place between them and HN95 and you on the 13th of February 1987. Do you see that?
Yes.
Could we look first of all at paragraph 2 and 3? I'll guide you around this because there's some redaction here, Mr. MacLeod, but in short, what we see at paragraph 2 is that Stefan Scott, who's HN95 here, had been invited to work in part of the SWP centre dealing with computers and word processing. And the security service described the invitation there at the end of the paragraph as a unique honour in view of the brevity of his membership of the party. Do you recall him being invited to work at the SWP centre?
No, I can't recall.
Would you agree that if he was so invited, it was proper to regard it as a unique honour?
Whether I would describe it as a unique honour or not, I don't know if I could put that. I don't think I've got sufficient information to make that decision.
Do you recall at any point thinking that Stefan Scott was doing particularly well in his deployment?
From what I remember, I think it had been satisfactory.
The same document. Oh. Sorry, can we have paragraph 3 enlarged again? Thank you. The same document records this. In essence, there was discussion of a practical difficulty regarding Scott taking up the role. And then it reads as follows: the other objections were more on principle. The AC felt that the raison d'etre of the SDS was primarily the discovery of law and order intelligence, which would not be better served by Scott, who has done sterling work at Wapping in recent months, working in the centre. The AC was also concerned that if Scott became a full-time employee of the SWP, he would be at their disposal and could be moved to any part of the country at their behest. He felt that the SDS could, through no fault of their own, lose control both of the operation and of Scott himself. So it appears that whilst the security service were in favour of him taking up the role, it was vetoed by the Metropolitan Police Service, by a special branch. Do you remember that situation?
No, I can't.
Would it be fair to say, looking at this as an example, that ultimately the Metropolitan Police Service retained control over how officers were tasked rather than the security service?
Yes, I mean, special branch and their paymasters. I would have been concerned if this had been sort of handed over to the security service. This is a police operation, and although they have a vested interest, I'm not sure that I would be comfortable with them dictating what, on issues like this, what should or should not be done.
The concern expressed towards the end of that paragraph about the risk of losing control both of the operation and of Scott himself, do you recall sharing a concern about losing control of the officer?
I can't remember that conversation.
Was there generally a concern that it was possible that management might lose control of officers deployed on long-term infiltration such as this?
I can't recall ever having a conversation with anybody in management or further up the chain on this issue.
Was there ever a concern that officers might become too ensconced in their undercover roles, too far removed from policing?
I think that certainly would be a concern, yes.
Can we zoom out, please, and go back to the first paragraph of this note? We know from this note that Stefan Scott attended the meeting before you, and the first paragraph records that he arrived before you. So HN95 arrived before MacLeod, do you see that?
Yes.
And was able to share with us the disappointment raised by the refusal of his masters to allow him to take up the job in SWP administration, which he has been offered. Were you ever made aware at the time of Stefan Scott's disappointment at the decision not to allow him to take up the offer?
No, I can't recall.
So you didn't speak to him about that at any stage that you remember?
No, I didn't.
How usual was it, in your experience, for individual undercover officers to meet and speak with the security services in this manner, as is recorded here?
Not that often.
Does it surprise you to see recorded here what appears to have been a conversation between Stefan Scott and the representative of the security service before your arrival concerning his deployment?
Yes.
If you had known that he had had that conversation at the time, would you have spoken to him about it?
Yes.
And what might you have said to him?
It's what we would say to the security service rather than him.
And what would you say to the security service?
That they come through us.
So you don't regard it as appropriate that they had as it were, a side conversation with him that didn't involve you?
Correct.
I think you know from having seen documentation subsequently that about a year after this, Mr. Scott came to be removed from the unit. You were no longer in post at the time. But knowing that he was, do you have any reflection on how he was handled in regard to this offer of employment at the SWP?
No, I can't recall. There may have been. Eric might have had information, but I didn't.
Do you recall whether Stefan Scott seemed bitter or annoyed that this opportunity of employment had been refused?
Frankly, I can't recall what his reaction was. No, I can't recall.
I want to take that down now, please, and ask you about another meeting between Stefan Scott and the security service, with the caveat that you were not present at the meeting, but I just want to show you the document. It's UCPI 022317. It's your B14, sir. And this is a meeting in July of 1987. So the meeting I've just asked you about was February, and now we're jumping forward to July 1987. All right, so 4 months later, Mr. Scott met again with the security service, but this time with Eric Docker present. And I want to ask you about paragraph 3 in particular. Which reads as follows. At 1:15 there was a break for a sandwich lunch laid on by F4. HN95 held forth on how boring were the people in the SWP. The women were ugly, and there were few individuals who were inclined to make jokes or tell funny stories. They spent all their time thinking along narrow ideological lines. One could not watch football, for example, because it was considered ideologically unsound. Did Eric Docker ever report back to you that at a meeting with the security service, Stefan Scott had, to quote this note, held forth on how boring were the people and said that the women were ugly?
No, I wasn't privy to any of that.
If you had been privy to Stefan Scott describing those he was reporting on in that way, what would your reaction have been?
I'm pretty disgusted with the language.
Did he express those sorts of sentiments or opinions to you or in your presence? Do you recall? So away from the security service?
No, he didn't.
If we take this down, please, can we look at another security service note, UCPI 022350. And Mr. MacLeod, this is another note by the security service arising from the February 1987 meeting with Mr. Scott, at which we know from the other document you were present. And if we turn to page 5, please. This is a more detailed note about what Mr. Scott told them about the SWP. And if we zoom in, please, at paragraph 16, if we could do the whole of 16, if we can, please. The security service appear to have been asking Mr. Scott about particular individuals within the SWP. And it is recorded that his description of the individual at point H was that she was the girlfriend of somebody fat and ugly. Again, do you recall Stefan Scott using those sorts of descriptors about women?
I'm sorry, this page here, can you tell me what page you... Oh, it's on a separate page. Thank you. Yeah. Can you, yeah, I think that's disgraceful. What more can I say?
Are you sure it didn't come to your attention at the time that Mr. Scott was using this sort of language to describe women in the SWP?
Well, I mean, that was so long ago. I mean, he might, I mean, even at that, I think I'd be pretty disgusted if I had been present with that kind of behaviour. No, I can't say that information is correct.
Is it possible, Mr. MacLeod, that that sort of language to describe women was commonplace at the time and so it didn't stand out to you? Commonplace in the SDS?
Well, I don't know how the judge commonplace.
Well, did you hear it with some level of frequency within the SDS?
Well, that's the thing. I may have done, may not have done. I'm inclined to err on the side not to have done. That just, I mean, it's that kind of language is just unnecessary apart from anything else. And I think we would have picked up on this. I mean, it really is.
But you don't recall picking up on it, is that right?
No, I didn't, because I can't remember. I can't remember him saying this. I mean, it's so long ago. He may well have done. I mean, I'm trying to wrap my mind back that far. I honestly can't remember. All I can tell you is I would find that language unacceptable. No matter whether it was that many years ago or not, it's pretty disgusting.
It was no proper part of an undercover deployment for these officers to be assessing the attractiveness of the women they came across, was it?
It's, what can I say? It's just unacceptable.
Does it cause you any concern in terms of his attitude towards or how he viewed women, that he appears, Mr. Scott, repeatedly to have commented on their attractiveness when reporting back?
I can't remember reading any of that. I'm just struggling here to recall.
But looking back on it now, if that had come to your attention at the time, whether you recall it or not, would it have caused you to question the officer's attitude towards women if they were repeatedly reporting on the women's attractiveness?
Yes, of course it would.
And do you recall that ever happening? That you ever had cause to think on
Yes,
that?
but if it wasn't that frequent that he was using this kind of language to describe women.
All right, can I turn now to some more general points about the relationship with the security service? And can we start, please, by just going back to a document we were looking at a moment ago, UCPI 022317, your B14, sir. And Mr. MacLeod, this is the July meeting with Scott that you were not at, but Eric Docker went to. And can we look, please, at paragraph 2? I just want to ask about your awareness of something that was conveyed at this meeting by Mr. Docker. So the security service note records Mr. Docker reporting somewhat apologetically to F4 that Detective Chief Superintendent Ray Parker of S Squad had commanded recently that henceforth requests for meetings between security service officers and SDS agents were to be directed to him in writing before any arrangements were made. F4 wondered what had brought about this alteration in procedure, but Docker professed not to know and said he could only obey orders. Gentle probing by F4 elicited the information that a tightening up of procedures was underway in Metropolitan Police Special Branch. Docker insisted, however, that these measures were totally unrelated to our service. Docker concluded lamely that he had been given to understand that originally matters had been conducted in the manner now prescribed by Parker, but the system had relaxed over the years. Questioned further, Docker said that he imagined Parker would require a letter putting forward a request for a meeting together with a brief outline of the objective. F4 considered this information but did not make a fuss about it to Docker. Do you recall what is recorded here, namely that Detective Chief Superintendent Ray Parker commanded that requests for meetings between the security service and individual SDS officers should go through him?
Yes, I knew that anyway. Yes, anything like that would be channeled through the Chief Superintendent.
The suggestion here appears to be that the system had relaxed, to use the words from this document, over the years, and that Detective Chief Superintendent Parker was attempting to reinstate the process which required all requests to go through him. Do you remember that tightening of procedure?
No, I can't, but I can understand Ray Parker's position. Of course, that's the right thing to do. Otherwise, the security service would be allowed to take up running the show. So no, I don't see there's an issue there.
Right, so you would agree with what Mr. Parker was trying to achieve there?
Yes, of course.
And you see it as a way of controlling the security service's access to the SDS?
Precisely.
Were you conscious before this tightening up that the SDS had been organising meetings between its officers and the security service without going through the higher level of supervision?
I only became aware as a result of this hearing.
As to the general relationship between the security service and the SDS, can I ask that we look, please, at a couple of passages in your witness statement? Firstly, at paragraph 109B, page 49, please. If we could just have the whole of 109, that would be, sorry. Thank you. So you were being asked questions, Mr. MacLeod, about the responsibility for targeting of SDS officers, you say that the responsibility for the final decision lay formally with you. But you acted in conjunction with the security service and senior Metropolitan Police Service officers up to the level of Chief Superintendent of S Squad.
I'm sorry, what page are we on here?
So it's page 49 of your witness statement. You should have up paragraph 109.
Oh yes, yeah, sorry.
And in the second half of paragraph B, you suggest that given that Special Branch's role was to assist them, being the security service, they had the primary remit and the commensurate amount of influence to go with it. My question is, to what extent, in your experience, was the security service influencing the tasking of officers during your time as Detective Chief Inspector? I don't want you to answer in regard to any individual officer. I'm asking for your recollection in general.
The security service might well have attempted to influence the targeting by the undercover officers, but I would be very uncomfortable, and I share Ray Parker's view on this. This ought not to have happened.
So what the security service ought not to have been responsible for targeting undercover officers, is that what you mean?
Yes.
Were they in practice influencing the SDS to that extent?
Yeah, I think they're probably. I'm not aware of there having been too many meetings with the security service. Whenever there were meetings, it would be in the company of myself and or Eric.
And what would you assess to have been their influence on decisions about tasking of undercover officers?
Well, I think the tasking would be to ensure that, in so doing, on behalf of the security service, that the field officers were not likely. They should, basically, the field officers should not primarily be influenced by the undercover officers should not be influenced, or should not have been influenced by conversations or briefings by the security service.
They should not have been, in your view, but to what extent do you think that they were in fact?
It's difficult to know. Very difficult to know.
If we turn over to look at what you say a bit further down, paragraph 109F, please, over the page. You say this: the security service's priorities influenced where UCOs would be deployed, as I have stated already. They had a significant degree of influence that bordered on control. This influence manifested itself both formally, such as through the annual requirements meetings and the assistance role described in the Home Office guidelines, and informally, In terms of their informal influence, the security service actively tried to maintain good relations with the SDS management, including by providing corporate hospitality. And then you mention an example of a document that records a pub lunch. Do you stand by that description, a significant degree of influence that bordered on control?
I think that was probably true, yes.
Eric Docker gave evidence to the inquiry a couple of weeks ago, and his evidence was to the effect that he perceived that the flow of information was largely one way, namely the police were giving the security service information rather than anything much coming back the other way. Do you agree with that?
I think that was true, yes, from my recollection.
All right, thank you. Can we take that down? And I'm going to move to a different topic now, Mr. MacLeod. That topic being the existence, the conducting by undercover officers of intimate and sexual relationships in their undercover deployments. Can we start by having a look at what you said in your witness statement about officers who served under your command? It's page 142, paragraph 252. And you said this: I wish to say at the outset of this section that I feel I owe it to those UCOs who worked in the SDS when I was a manager to assist the inquiry. I felt a duty of care to them, and I do now. They made enormous sacrifices to work in a very difficult environment, and they made a valuable contribution to policing and the needs of the state, as those needs were then perceived to be. The majority of officers were stalwart professionals, and I feel strongly that their achievements should not be retrospectively underappreciated or overshadowed by the misconduct of a few. But when you referred there to the misconduct of a few, does it follow that you accept that engaging in deceitful sexual relationships in their undercover identities was misconduct?
Well, it certainly was misconduct.
You say in the next paragraph that if you were asked to make a moral judgment, you would be disapproving of such conduct. Is that right?
If that's what I said at the time, that's right.
Could we have a look at what you said to Operation Hearn in 2012, MPS 0726640? It's your A4, sir. And Mr. MacLeod, we're going back to the notes that Operation Hearn took when they spoke to you before they drafted your statement. And can we turn, please, to page 4 of that document? Thank you. And can we zoom in on the paragraph beginning, although MacLeod did not specifically, and, sorry, the line immediately below that. Thank you. And this is what was recorded by Operation Hearn. I'll read it into the record. Although MacLeod did not specifically say that sexual relationships between field officers and their targets were permitted, he made it quite clear that they went on, and to some degree were a part of the job. In summary, he stated that if a field officer had a close relationship with a target, and a sexual relationship was a likely progression of that relationship, and the officer refused or made excuses, then this could have caused unwanted attention and possibly lead to the officer being identified as a police officer. And then in quotes, the closer a field officer got, the better, end quote. MacLeod said that his objective was to get the intelligence, not to make moral judgments.
Yes, that's regrettable. I withdraw that.
Sorry, did you say you withdraw that?
Yes.
And what part precisely do you withdraw?
All of it.
Did you say to Operation Hearn Or did you make clear, as they have recorded it, that relationships, sexual relationships, went on and to some degree were a part of the job?
If I said that, it's regrettable, but I might have said that, yes.
And if you said it, does it follow that it was true? That you understood that relationships did go on between undercover officers?
The trouble is I didn't know what was going on with the relationships. I only sort of became aware of the relationships only just, if you like, quite recently. I wasn't aware of that when this statement was made.
Well, when this statement was made, Operation Hearn are recording that you were making it clear that such relationships had gone on and to some degree were a part of the job. So that suggests you were aware in 2012, doesn't it?
I had no knowledge of it going on. Hypothetically, if I said that, then it's not right.
So you may have said that to Operation Hearn, but it was inaccurate when you said it?
Yes.
Can you think of why you might have told Operation Hearn that relationships went on and to some degree were part of the job, if that was not your state of knowledge when you managed the unit?
That's not the state of knowledge I had.
So why would you have said that to Operation Hearn then? Yes, 2012 I've mentioned.
No, I can't be sure.
Do you maintain that you did not know that relationships between undercover officers under your command were going on?
No, I didn't know.
The Operation Hearn note from 2012 goes on to record you saying that if a field officer had a close relationship with a target and a sexual relationship was a likely progression of that relationship, and the officer refused or made excuses, this could have caused unwanted attention and possibly lead to the officer being identified as a police officer. So you seem to be suggesting that circumstances could arise during a deployment in which an officer felt, as it were, compelled to conduct the relationship in order to maintain their cover.
I had no knowledge at the time. If I said that, then that's regrettable, but I had no knowledge of it going on at the time. As I said earlier, the fact that sexual relations had taken place, I wasn't aware of at the time, and it was only subsequently I realised the extent of it.
Did you have an appreciation at the time that you managed the unit that there was a risk that officers might engage in sexual relationships undercover?
I think there may have been a misplaced judgment that would necessarily have impacted on the undercover officer's ability to carry on the work of intelligence gathering, that it wouldn't necessitate sexual relations in order to do that. Totally unnecessary.
Can I just make sure that evidence is understood? Are you saying that at the time it may have been judged that circumstances could arise in which officers would feel compelled to enter into a sexual relationship to maintain cover?
Well, they may have done, but that's not to say, that doesn't mean to say I was approving.
But did you appreciate that there was a risk of officers entering into such relationships at the time?
Well, I suppose there's always a risk.
And did you, whilst you were the Detective Chief Inspector of the unit, take any steps to guard against that risk eventuating?
No, I didn't.
If we take down that document, which is the notes that Operation Hearn made when they spoke to you, and can we have up on the screen the witness statement you signed thereafter, MPS 0726827. It's your A2, sir. And this is a statement dated in November 2012, Mr. MacLeod. And can we turn, please, to page... So before we do, we see you signed it there on the 21st of November 2012 at the top of the first page. And can we turn, please, to page 5? Can we zoom in, please, to the third full paragraph? In fact, 3, 4, and 5, please. So starting in terms of relationships. Thank you. Right, this is what appeared in your witness statement, Mr. MacLeod. I'll read it for you. In terms of relationships between a field officer and their compatriots within their target groups, it is obvious that the closer a field officer got to the key people, the better the intelligence was likely to be. There may be occasions where relationships formed with women within the group and sexual relations followed. This is not something a field officer would discuss with his supervising officers, but it has to be accepted that such liaisons will form. Do you agree that that appears to suggest that you appreciated that there was a real risk that such liaisons, as they were described there, will form?
I suppose there's always the inherent risk that that will happen when men and women are thrown close together in these circumstances. It doesn't mean to say I'm approving, I'm just stating the fact that these things do happen.
And you go on to say there, it certainly wouldn't have surprised me if it had occurred. Do you see that in the single line paragraph just below? Although I was never aware of any sexual relationships between any of my field officers and O'Weary, it certainly wouldn't have surprised me if it had occurred.
Well, it wouldn't, by the very nature of the work that they were doing. It doesn't mean to say that I'm approving of it, not at all. I think it's a question of facing up to reality that these things do happen in the world. So, yes, however abhorrent that may seem, I think it would be naive to presume otherwise, that they're thrown close together over periods of time. So it wouldn't have surprised me. That doesn't mean to say necessarily that I'm approving, not at all.
Understood, but if the situation is that it wasn't something that you approved of, and you appreciated there was a risk of it happening, did you not consider it part of your role as the Detective Chief Inspector to take steps to try to prevent it occurring?
Well, up until that point, and well, until the exposure occurred in 20, whenever it was, when Caroline Lucas made a statement to House of Commons and exposed the whole thing. Until then, it wasn't. It hadn't been an issue. Was I surprised? Perhaps we shouldn't have been surprised something like this would happen.
Let me just clarify. I had understood your evidence before now to indicate that you appreciated at the time you were the Detective Chief Inspector that there was at least a risk of such relationships occurring. Is that right?
That's correct.
So whether or not you knew that they were happening, you appreciated that they might occur. Is that right?
That's correct.
And so my question was aimed at whether in those circumstances you did anything to guard against sexual relationships occurring between the officers you managed and the people they were mixing with undercover.
I'd like to know how I would go about managing that, because if people are so minded to form these close relationships, it doesn't matter what anyone might think or do, any kind of attempts to dissuade the officers from, they're just going to deny any participation in this kind of behaviour. So I think it's not that. I think we just got to face up to it. It's an unpalatable fact, but this is what happens when you put people in this kind of proximity to each other. I'm not saying it's inevitable. It shouldn't be inevitable. Maybe there should be ways of actually, maybe in retrospect, looking back, there should be ways in which we might have been able to maybe prevent or counter that from happening. We didn't. There's lots of things we got wrong in this all the way through.
So might it have been an idea, for example, to tell officers when they were recruited that sexual relationships with those they were mixing with were considered a complete no?
Well, they were.
But might it have been an idea to make that very clear to the officers?
I think it was made clear from my recollection. I'm sure Eric will vouch for that.
So do you recall telling officers explicitly that sexual relationships were, in your view, totally inappropriate?
I didn't specifically, but there's the manual in the back office, which outlined, well, it did outline the risks of extramarital relationships.
So are you saying that the binder that consisted of the experiences of former undercover officers
Yeah.
contained guidance warning officers against sexual relationships in their undercover identities?
From my recollection, yes.
And do you recall whether that came from a particular officer or was repeated within the binder? Don't use any names.
I can't remember. It's just one of those things that I picked up, and I found all of the information in the folder very helpful, given that I'd never been an undercover officer, and it was just interesting just to get the full lowdown on what advice had gone before. And essentially it was a folder or a jot, or I can't remember what, but it was all the experiences of previous undercover officers, just bits of paper, just notes as to what the pitfalls were.
But do you have a firm recollection that amongst the pitfalls described was having a sexual relationship whilst undercover? Was that acknowledged as a possibility?
No, it didn't. I suppose it's always a possibility,
But the question is aimed at whether you recall seeing guidance, written guidance,
yes,
to undercover SDS officers about avoiding sexual relationships whilst deployed.
I believe, if my memory serves me right, there was in that book, in that jotter.
So it must have been appreciated not just by you, but also by others, that that was a risk during a long-term undercover deployment. Is that fair?
Yes.
And did you, as the officer ultimately, with day-to-day command of the unit, do anything to reinforce that such a situation would be inappropriate?
No, there had never been any cause for me to make that statement, or no.
You say, going back to your Hearn witness statement here, at the bottom of that first paragraph on the screen, this namely relationships, is not something a field officer would discuss with his supervising officers, but it has to be accepted that such liaisons will form. As the Detective Chief Inspector of the unit, did you not consider that the onus was on you to prompt discussion with the officers deployed, with the field officers, to guard against these relationships happening, rather than assuming that they would or wouldn't come to speak to you?
Well, given that most of these officers were recruited into the unit before my time, so there was only 2 or 3 new recruits onto the unit in the time I was there, which is a relatively short time. There would be no reason for me especially to single out. I would have expected this all to have been clearly understood. It was in the manual. I mean, it's how much do you, how far do you go in trying to preach to individuals what they should and shouldn't do? I just thought common sense would have kicked in.
But did you not consider that that was part and parcel of the role of being the Detective Chief Super Inspector, to set the boundaries for the officers that were deployed?
But it hadn't been flagged up. All of this has just come about as a result of the 2015 or whatever it was expose. This was not something that was regularly discussed, or even, in fact, it was seldom discussed, if at all. I mean, we're having this discussed this right now as to how this could happen. No, I can't remember any dialogue going on. I can remember reading the folder, but apart from that, no, I can't remember there being a need to raise this issue about relationships, given that the majority of these officers had been recruited before my time. Whatever advice the then serving Chief Inspector or Inspector might have given them, I can only say it's individual. I never picked up on that. Maybe I should have done. But no, that's it wasn't like something that came up regularly, or there was a reason to discuss, reproach, or in any other way address this issue with the officers. Because the question would be, well, why are you asking me this question now? And most of them have been serving for 3 or 4 years before. So I think it's unfair just to point to the individuals who did engage in that kind of behaviour, and all of this came out in the wash. It's only then that this whole gamut of relationships has come to the fore. It hadn't been high on the agenda at any time in my 18 months where it came up or a need to be discussed.
So even though the risk was appreciated, you didn't consider it necessary to raise it, is that right?
Yes, but we're discussing this retrospectively after this major event occurred, and they're all looking for answers to these questions. Of course, there's a lot more that could have been done. Maybe things were done incorrectly, but I think for the best part, that was really as far as it went in terms of overseeing and monitoring the behaviour of the officers. And let's not forget that these behaviours were of a minority when you look at the size of the unit over the years. So it's relatively small. And this issue, I'm not trying in any way downplay the seriousness of it, of course not. What I'm saying is it wasn't something that came up on the agenda at in Safe House meetings. So no, it's easy to say we should have done this, that and the other, and I totally agree. But that's it's just unfortunate that's the way it worked out. And that is not in any shape or form me condoning his relationship. Far, far from
it. If, as you suggest there in your witness statement, this wasn't a topic that the field officers would discuss with supervising officers, did you not consider that the onus was on you to guard against the risk by speaking to them?
If there wasn't a reason to, and I can't recall there being a reason for doing so, then of course we'd raise the question. And, you know, it's, in circumstances, it's really, really difficult to defend the indefensible. And I'm not sure that we would necessarily have got the answers we're looking for, because the officers, if they were so engaged, would be the last ones to admit to the behaviours.
So I've got quite a way to go on this topic, but I see the time. I wonder if we ought to take a short break now and conclude with a shorter session for the day.
Certainly, and we'll rise then for 15 minutes, and you anticipate finishing approximately when today?
I'll be guided to some extent by feedback in terms of Mr. MacLeod's
Yes.
ability to continue, but certainly no later than 4:30, I imagine.
Is that reassuring?
Yes, thank you, sir.
Good.
All rise. Thank you. Could we have back up on the screen, please, MPS 0726640. It's your A4, sir. And Mr. MacLeod, this is just going back to the notes that Operation Hearn took that we started this section with, page 4, please. And the third and fourth paragraph starting, although MacLeod did not. Thank you. And I started by asking you about this, Mr. MacLeod, which you said you wanted to withdraw, and that it was regrettable. Can I ask you about the single line that says this? MacLeod said that his objective was to get the intelligence, not to make moral judgments. Does that fairly sum up your attitude as the Detective Chief Inspector of the SDS, that your primary concern was that the officers under your command obtained useful intelligence?
No.
Did you say that to Operation Hearn, nonetheless?
I can't remember.
Could we take that down and have up, please, paragraph 255A of your inquiry statement? It's page 145. So at the bottom of the page, please, 255A. This is a section of your statement in which you were responding to things said by undercover officers in their statements to the inquiry. And firstly, HN25, if you want to consult the cipher list again, please do, without saying the name. So HN25 joined the SDS in around May 1987 when you were in post. He didn't deploy until October, so just after you had left the unit. So he would have been in the back office whilst you were in post. Do you follow?
Yes.
He said this about sexual relationships. There was nothing direct in place as to not conduct such practices. As this was prior to Ripper, there were no clear directions to work to. We were essentially intelligence gatherers. We were under pressure to deliver most of the time. We worked under extremely loose guidelines. Firstly, do you agree with HN25's assertion that officers were under pressure to deliver most of the time?
Well, I would have, yes, I guess they were under pressure to deliver. I think it's inherent in the work.
Did you give any signal to the undercover officers under your command that the primary consideration was the gathering of intelligence as opposed to their conduct generally whilst deployed?
No, I think in retrospect I should have had it the other way around. That
Do you mean in relation to sexual relationships? They should have found another way around it. Is that?
Yeah.
I've understood correctly. Do you agree with HN25's assertion that the officers worked under extremely loose guidelines?
I suppose it's always been the case since the operation ever started. they've operated under fairly loose guidelines. I think it was only in more recent times with Ripper, and it was long after I retired or left the unit. So yes, I suppose there were loose guidelines.
Are you sure that in your style of management of the unit, it wasn't a case of officers being expected to go out and gather intelligence, and management were willing to turn a blind eye to things like relationships if they occurred?
As I said before, I don't think these relationships were as prominent or even known about in the within the management team. I certainly wasn't aware of that these relationships were going on. It was all news to me, and furthermore, even more so in recent times, the extent of it.
Can we go back, please, to the witness statement that you gave to Operation Hearn in 2012, MPS 0726827, your A2, sir, and paragraph 5 that we were looking at, sorry, page 5 that we were looking at earlier, and the paragraphs that begin in terms of relationships down to the next subheading. The final paragraph of those three there, Mr. MacLeod, I didn't read to you earlier, but it says this: the field officers all knew the boundaries and were left to use their common sense when deployed. Extramarital relations occur in all walks of life, and field officers are no exception. I do not believe that we should be setting a moral code for one specific group of police officers to the exclusion of others. This has to be a personal judgment by the officers. Did you consider that the question of whether or not to enter into a sexual relationship whilst undercover was a matter for the personal judgment of the officers, as opposed to your oversight role?
Yeah. No, I don't think I should really correct that.
And what would you correct it to?
They knew the boundaries, left to use their common sense when deployed, and then talking in general terms, extramarital relations occur in all walks of life, and field officers, no exception. I don't. Yeah, you can't really conflate the two. We should be setting a moral code for one specific. No, that is not a good choice of words.
Right, well let's break it down. Was it your view at the time you served that the field officers knew the boundaries and should be left to use their common sense with regard to sexual relationships?
Well, I think that's how it had to be, because they're working in isolation, and these, as I said earlier on, these relationships are bound to happen. No matter how unpalatable we may find it. It's the choice of words are not good.
Right. What about extramarital relations occur in all walks of life, and field officers are no exception? Does that accurately and fairly represent your view?
Well, I mean, it's stating the obvious. Extramarital relations occur in all walks of life, and field and police officers generally are no exception.
Do you consider that there is any material difference between a person conducting an extramarital affair in their real identity and an undercover officer conducting a sexual relationship in their cover identity?
Yes, there is a distinction. Relationships do occur, say, but in relationships with the activists brings a whole new dimension because of the nature of the, if you like, the deceit.
But the woman isn't freely consenting or
No.
doesn't know with whom she's really consenting to
Yeah.
have sex, does she?
No.
And so that makes it quite different from simply an extramarital affair,
Correct,
doesn't it?
yes.
So when that statement to Hearn says, I do not believe that we should be setting a moral code for one specific group of police officers to the exclusion of others, on reflection, do you in fact see that it's quite a different situation and there may be scope, there may be an argument for setting some sort of code or some sort of disciplinary rules for undercover officers?
Yeah, I agree, totally.
Do you stand by the assertion then that this has to be a personal judgment by the officers, or do you resolve from that on reflection?
Yes, I think it can't be left to them.
Are you quite sure, Mr. MacLeod, that during the time that you served as the Detective Chief Inspector of the SDS, you didn't know or suspect that any relationships were going on between deployed officers and those they were mixing with?
I had no idea.
None at all?
None at all.
Not even a rumour, gossip, banter, anything to alert you to them
No.
going on?
I was the last one to know.
What makes you say you were the last one to know?
Well, if I'd become aware of it, then their secret would be out and they wouldn't want to admit to having any extramarital relationship.
Do you mean you'd be the last person they would tell?
Yes.
Would there be any truth in this suggestion that you disapproved of field officers entering into deceitful relationships? You've said that. And that you suspected or knew that there was a risk that they might happen, but that you closed your eyes and ears to that risk?
Well, although there was a risk of it happening, it's not a question of closing your eyes and ears. It's not always so patently obvious.
Did you close your eyes and ears, acknowledging the risk but not wanting to know if it was really going on?
No, I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that. Because I can't recall during the time I was on unit, there was never any, I never had any information of anything untoward like that during my time. So I can't really, I'm not going to admit to, that I should have known. I didn't know simply because when, if they wanted to keep their secret, there's no way that they're going to share that secret with me, no matter how much you try to elicit information of, because they know very well that that could spell the end of their time on the SDS. So they're mindful all the time. So No, I couldn't possibly be expected to know who is having a relationship with whom.
Robert Lambert has given evidence to the effect that he thought, or he considered, that there was tacit acceptance by management that these relationships would go on. So he says Detective Chief Inspector, in fact he thought he'd told Detective Inspector Barber. Detective Chief Inspector Waite recalls hearing from Lambert that he'd had sex with a woman and thought she might be pregnant. And he considered that there might be tacit acceptance from management. He wasn't removed from the squad, having told Detective Chief Inspector Waite that information.
Well, I never had any of that information. That's what makes me very cross. I was the boss. I had a right to know, but again, I was the very last one to find out what was going on. And this is over a period of many years. We're talking about what happened in 1970 and 1987, whatever. And then fast forward to the expose in 2011. I became aware that there had been relationships.
Thank you. After you...
Forgive me
Sorry.
for a moment. May I just say, these problems have occurred with almost every witness who's given lengthy evidence like you, so please don't take it to heart.
I'm relieved to hear that, sir.
After you left your post as the Detective Chief Inspector of the SDS, you retained some contact with the unit, didn't you, in your subsequent role?
Say again, I didn't hear.
After you left your position as the Detective Chief Inspector,
Yeah.
you retained some contact, didn't you, with the SDS in your subsequent role on C Squad?
On C-Squad, yes, correct.
Did you hear at any stage, after you left the SDS, that Helen Steele was making attempts to track down John Dines, the man she knew as John Barker?
I heard that, yes.
And did you hear that it started in around 1992, her attempt to track him down? Did you hear about it around that date? So 1990s?
Early 1990s, I would have thought earlier than 92, because I think I went on to B Squad as a chief then, so it would have been 91.
If I should tell you the evidence the inquiry has suggests that her attempt started around 1992,
Oh, right, okay.
does that assist? You think it could have been as early as
I
1991 or 2?
I thought it was earlier than that.
Do you recall hearing that she had visited his parents in London, his real parents?
No, but what I did hear, John Dines must have moved to Australia because she tracked him down there.
So
Now,
you heard about that happening?
I heard about that, but I don't know what timeline that we're talking about here.
Did you hear anything before Miss Steele managed to track down John Dines in Australia? Did you hear anything about her attempting to track him down?
No,
So that was the earliest event
Yeah.
that you heard of?
correct.
Are you sure about that?
I'm certain.
But Bob Lambert, whilst he was the detective inspector in the SDS in the early to mid 1990s, he was aware, based on documents we've found, he was aware that Miss Steele was attempting to track down John Dines in the early to mid 1990s. Did he ever make you aware that that was going on?
No, he didn't make me aware. I think Eric made me aware.
Eric Docker.
Yeah. Somebody told me that she traced him down to Australia.
And at the time that that was brought to your attention, was there any discussion of why Miss Steele may have gone to such lengths to track down the man she knew as John Barker?
No.
You seem very certain about that. Have you a clear recollection of there being
It's fairly clear.
no discussion?
Can you just recap the dates, because I'm not sure whether, can we just clarify that?
I can't clarify it immediately on my feet, but it may not matter much the dates, in the sense that, are you confident that the first you heard was when Miss Steele tracked John Dines down in Australia and not earlier? Because then we can fix the sequence of events.
Yes, I can be sure of that, but I can't remember what date that was,
Right.
what time gap.
But my question was aimed not so much at the date, but at your level of knowledge at the time you heard she had tracked him down in Australia, or your understanding of why she had gone to such lengths. Was there, for example, any suggestion that it was because the two of them had been in an intimate relationship whilst John Dines was deployed?
That's my understanding, that there had been a relationship.
Was that your understanding at the time you heard that Miss Steele had tracked him down in Australia as well?
I think so, if I remember, yes. I think it's such a long time ago, I don't want to give any misleading responses, but I do think around that time I was aware.
And how did you become aware? Did somebody tell you?
Yes, I'm not for certain if it was Eric, somebody told me.
I won't ask you to cast around for names, just in case they're covered by
Yes, of
restrictions,
course,
but
no.
one of the possibilities is that Eric Docker told you that his understanding was that John Dines had had a relationship with Helen Steele?
I'm not sure if it was Eric, but I was aware.
If it wasn't Eric Docker, was it another former SDS officer or manager?
I honestly don't know, but I do recall having been told that she had tracked him down in Australia. And I you know, my first thought is that, well, the only person who would tell me this is Eric. There's nobody else that I was that close to on the SDS that they would have briefed me on this, but by this time I was back on C Squad. So I can't be absolutely certain, but I'm aware of the visit she made, the fact that she tracked him down, and but any other information around that, I'm sorry, but I can't help you.
But how confident are you that you learnt of the existence of their intimate relationship at the same time as learning that Miss Steele had tracked down John Dines?
Yes, it was at the same time I was aware.
I'm going to move to another officer. I won't be able to finish this topic within 5 or 10 minutes, so I wonder whether it's better to pick up in the morning.
Very much in your hands. Would you like to stop now? I'm perfectly content if you say yes. Otherwise, this particular topic can be finished in the next 10 minutes or so. Is that?
Well,
10
I'm happy
to
to
15.
continue. I'm happy for us to continue now.
Thank you.
If
You're sure of that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Fine. In which case, we'll try and finish this topic, and then we'll break.
I'm very good.
Good.
Could I move on to ask you about HN87? If you want to remind yourself, without saying the name, who that is, please do.
Yes.
Thank you. And can we have on the screen, please, your witness statement at paragraph 258D, page 151. Sorry, it's my fault. Could we start with paragraph 258 on the previous page? Otherwise, Mr. MacLeod will not know what I'm talking about. Thank you. So this is a section in which you were asked about extracts from HN87's witness statement, Mr. MacLeod, in which he has admitted to engaging in sexual activity during his deployment. And he deployed between May 1987, which was when you were in post, and on to December 1990 after you had left the unit. And you were asked, if we go to paragraph 258D, about what he had said. And in response, you said this: management did not give officers the impression that unserious sexual activity was not something about which they needed to know. Any sexual activity in an UCO's undercover identity was something of which managers should have been made aware. And if you want to see, if we go back, sorry to jump around, but if we go back to paragraph B, subparagraph B, you were responding to what HN87 had said, which was, I do not think that I told management at the time about any of the above incidents. I managed the situations as well as I could in the circumstances. I did not think it was necessary to tell them. I would have informed them if anything had become more serious, which I would not have allowed anyway, or anybody had continued to pursue me once I had told them I was not interested. But this never happened. Right, so you were responding to that to say management did not give the impression that unserious sexual activity was not something about which they needed to know. are you quite sure that the impression was not given to officers that sexual activity that they didn't regard as serious would be overlooked or would not be, no action would be taken?
No, I don't.
And if undercover officers weren't told that they should declare sexual activity in their undercover identities, how did you expect them to know to declare it?
I really don't. I remember this, but I can't. No, I can't remember.
If we could look, please, at paragraph 258E. And to set the context, Mr. MacLeod, HN87's evidence to the inquiry is that the sexual activity that he engaged in occurred when he was staying with activists in houses or accommodation with activists in beds with them. And you said in your witness statement that you cannot recall whether you were aware that HN87 would stay at other activists' houses overnight. The UCOs were in such close proximity to activists that it does not surprise me to hear it. I would have expected the office to be informed, if not in advance, then at least afterward. Does that, you stand by that evidence? You weren't aware that he would stay at other activists' houses overnight, but it doesn't surprise you to hear it?
Yeah.
And you would have expected the officer to inform the office if they had stayed in those circumstances?
Right.
Did you ever discuss with HN87 that he was spending time in squats, he was spending time in accommodation with activists, including overnight?
I can't remember.
Do you recall whether he ever spoke to you about sharing beds with women in those circumstances?
No, I can't remember.
Including young women, women far younger than he was?
No.
Did he ever speak to you about any form of sexual activity with women whilst undercover?
No.
Other than in connection with this inquiry, did you hear anyone else speak of HN87 engaging in sexual activity whilst undercover?
No.
Do you agree that if it's not surprising that undercover officers were staying at activists' houses for the night, activists' homes, then the risk of sexual activity must have been fairly high for them?
Well, I can't comment on that because basically I don't know.
Put another way, if an officer stays overnight with an activist, does that not increase the risk, the opportunity for them to engage in sexual activity?
Well, I suppose you could say yes, it's an opportunity, but it doesn't take account of the fact there may be other people in the flat as well, and it may not always be what you imagine it to be. But if there are two people together, yes, I guess the answer is that temptation will be for some intimacy to take place.
Why would you have expected the office to be informed if an undercover officer was staying overnight at activists' homes?
I don't have an answer for that because I can't see the point.
With your statement that's on the screen says, I would have expected the office to be informed, if not in advance, then at least afterward.
Well, yes, and that's what I meant. Afterwards, you should notify the. You should be notified. Obviously, it can't be done at the time, so it's got to be the next day.
But why would you expect to be notified of that? Is it because there's a risk if an officer is staying overnight with activists that they might be engaging in sexual activity?
Well, it's very difficult to know if it's just one individual, what the threat would be. I can't, I don't really have an answer for that.
Right, so you can't explain why you said you would have expected the office to be informed?
No. Because I know much the office can do about it. And what's the point?
You were aware, weren't you, that officers, including HN87, might be drinking alcohol whilst in their cover identities?
No, I wasn't aware.
If we have a look at paragraph 258F to assist you. You said in your witness statement that you were aware that HN87 would drink with members of his target group. This was and is a common way to socialise. So that suggests that you had some awareness that HN87 and perhaps other undercover officers would drink alcohol commonly whilst deployed. Is that right?
Yes.
Did you consider that drinking alcohol and staying in activists' homes, the combination of those two things might give rise to a higher risk of sexual activity between officers and those they were mixing with?
Oh, for sure.
And is your position that you still took no steps to guard against that or warn the officers against doing so?
By that time, they had committed themselves to this engagement. And to intervene and to tell them to give an instruction not to get involved possibly could affect their cover story if they all of a sudden disappear at an earlier hour, and whatever the what the activist might think, if it's female, about leaving a party early, and if there was a relationship, no, I just once again, we come back to this. I mean, this really is something that should be left to the individual's judgment. And if the judgment is flawed, but I mean, you couldn't expect the DCI to take action late at night if there was some intimacy going to take place.
I'm not suggesting necessarily you would know to intervene in the very moment, but as a matter of generality, might it not have been a good idea to warn these officers? I know you might be drinking alcohol, I know you might be staying at activists' homes, but it's really important that you take all the steps you can to avoid getting yourself into this sort of situation, because I don't want you having sexual relationships. Could you not have said something like that to them?
You could, but what's to say they're going to obey it? You wouldn't know.
Is it not the case that whenever you give an instruction or guidance as a supervising officer, you have no idea really whether the officer's going to obey the instruction?
I think that would apply to all.
But it's not a reason never to instruct or guide,
No,
is it?
no, I accept that.
So did it never occur to you that you might give instruction or guidance on this particular topic,
No.
given what you knew about officers drinking alcohol and staying at activists' homes?
No, I can see where you come from, but no, I wouldn't have thought that would be. It would be something you would pick up the next meeting.
But did you ever pick it up at the next meeting?
No, I didn't, because if I didn't, no.
Amongst the relationships entered into by Bob Lambert in his undercover identity was one with a woman the inquiry is calling Jackie. If you want to consult the cipher list in case it's a name known to you, please do.
Means nothing to me.
and with Jackie, Bob Lambert, in his undercover identity, fathered a child that the inquiry is calling TBS, born in the autumn of 1985. The evidence the inquiry has heard is that Bob Lambert, in his undercover identity, continued to act as father to that child throughout the time that you were the Detective Chief Inspector of the unit. What awareness did you have, first of all, of Bob Lambert's relationship with Jackie?
Nil.
And of the son born to Jackie and Bob Lambert in Bob Lambert's cover identity?
Nil.
At any stage during your time on the SDS, did you hear anything about Bob Lambert having fathered a child?
None.
It has been suggested, I'll be corrected if I'm wrong, I think by Mike Chitty, that Bob Lambert bragged on occasion about having fathered a child whilst undercover. Did you ever hear him speaking about it?
No.
Did you have any awareness during the time you were the Detective Chief Inspector of Bob Lambert travelling frequently to the Dagenham area in East London?
No.
Did you have any awareness of him making payments to Jackie in respect of his son with her, TBS?
No.
Did you monitor the use by undercover officers of accounts or monies given to them in their undercover identities?
Give money to the activists.
Yes, so if Robert Lambert, the evidence the inquiry's heard is that he used money, he had money in his undercover identity, and he gave that money to Jackie to support their son, TBS.
I wasn't aware of that.
Did you have any way of monitoring what undercover officers did with monies they had in their undercover identity?
No.
So you remained entirely unaware of his ongoing relationship with his son, TBS, throughout the time you were the Detective Chief Inspector?
Totally.
Does it surprise you, looking back, that you remain totally unaware of this going on under your nose, effectively?
Yes, if you want to put it that way, yes. Because how otherwise would I have learned? If he's not going to share that information with me, nobody else in the unit is going to tell me. And I think that's probably why I was kept in the dark for so long, for that very reason.
The inquiry has heard evidence from some of those who were activists reported on by Bob Lambert at the time, that on occasion he brought his son, TBS, along to events with him as Bob Robinson. Did you become aware of Bob Robinson, his undercover persona, bringing a child along with him to events?
Extraordinary. No, I didn't.
Could I ask you about something you told Operation Hearn in connection with Robert Lambert, please? I'll bring the document up, MPS 0726640. It's your A4, sir. And can we have page 5? Mr. MacLeod, these are the notes taken by Operation Hearn again. We've looked at them a few times.
Yeah, okay.
And can we look at the section headed Bob Lambert, please? The whole of the 3 paragraphs, thank you. What you told Herm was that at that stage you had last seen Bob Lambert at Bob Lambert's retirement reception in 2007. And then you went on to say that you believed that Bob Lambert, quote, outed himself as a UCO due to the fact that he lost 2 children to a rare congenital condition, and as he, Bob Lambert, bore a child from a relationship whilst a field officer, he wanted to contact the mother of the child in order that the child could have tests for the condition. Can I ask, where, when, and how did you form the idea that Bob Lambert had outed himself as an undercover officer?
Well, that would be 2011, when just after Caroline Lucas made her announcement to the Houses of Parliament. That was the first I became aware of it.
And when you attended Bob Lambert's retirement reception in 2007, are you quite sure that you didn't know then that he had fathered a child whilst undercover?
Didn't know.
Can move on to another relationship entered into by Bob Lambert, this time with a woman. It's her real name, Belinda Harvey. The evidence is to the effect that he met her in April 1987, so whilst you were the Detective Chief Inspector of the SDS. At the time he met Miss Harvey, she was 24 years of age, and he was in his real identity 35, so a 9-year age gap. But he represented himself as being younger than he really was in his undercover identity. So she thought it was a 5-year age gap. Do you follow?
Yes.
Were you aware that undercover officers in their cover identities were representing themselves as younger than they really were?
No.
You were not aware of that?
No.
Did Bob Lambert say anything to you around or after April of 1987 about commencing a relationship, in fact another relationship, as it was?
No.
Did it come to your attention at all that he was spending a lot of time at an address in Forest Gate in East London around that time?
No.
The evidence the inquiry has received is that he was spending either a few nights or several nights each week with Belinda Harvey at the address she lived at in Forest Gate. You knew nothing about that at all?
No.
Would you have expected to have been aware if one of your officers was staying not at his cover address, but at the address of a woman?
Yes, I would have expected him to have told us.
But he didn't tell you?
No.
Is that your evidence?
No.
Did you hear anything at all to suggest that he had entered into a new relationship whilst you were the Detective Chief Inspector
No.
of the SDS?
No.
Did you ever see surveillance photographs in which Bob Lambert was captured in his cover identity?
No, I can't imagine why I would have seen surveillance photograph and what the circumstances in which the photograph was found.
I'm not suggesting there necessarily were, I'm asking whether that was something that happened. So, for example, in the run-up to the Debenhams attacks in July 87 or in the aftermath, were you aware of there being any surveillance which captured Bob Lambert's activities?
No. No, I wasn't. I wasn't aware. But I'm trying to think back to the events surrounding the Debenhams shooting when the SO13 arrest team, search team, went into his flat. I understand there was a photograph of Bob Lambert, which also showed a woman. Now, I don't know who...
That is Bob Lambert's evidence to this inquiry. Is that what you're referring to,
Yes.
or are you referring to an independent recollection?
No, that's what I'm...
Were you aware of a photograph being found when his flat was searched in September 1987 of him with a woman?
It's only what I've heard recently in this inquiry.
Not aware at the time?
No.
Looking back now and knowing what you know, namely that whilst you were the Detective Chief Inspector of the unit, Robert Lambert was supporting a son in his other undercover identity financially and in terms of spending some time with him, and also starting and continuing a relationship with Belinda Harvey, and maintaining contact with Jackie, the mother of TBS, certainly. Do you maintain the position that no more could have been done by you to root out this type of behaviour?
Well, given that I only became aware of that in recent times, there's not much I could have done if I wasn't aware.
And do you think there are any steps you ought to have taken to make yourself aware or to inquire about whether this sort of behaviour was going on or what Bob Lambert was spending his time doing undercover?
Well, I dare say there's a lot more that could have been done, probably more than just Bob Lambert, that we could have done better.
In any sense of what steps you think you might have taken?
We perhaps could have been a bit more vigilant and proactive, but there wasn't the basis on which to do that at that point, what I remember. All of this has come out retrospectively, and as I say, it's as it was at the time. There was nothing, I certainly wasn't aware of any of their relationships, let alone one, and I wasn't aware that he had fathered a child. All of this came out in 2000 and whenever it hit the press, when he was outed.
Just finally for today, the inquiry has also heard evidence from an officer we know as HN19. If you want to check the cipher list, please do. Don't say the name, which is restricted. He gave evidence to this inquiry back in the summer, and he said that in around the autumn of 1985, he attended a talk or a presentation at a security service premises with Tony Waite, the then Detective Chief Inspector, at which Tony Waite made what has been described as a joke in poor taste about one of the SDS officers having possibly fathered a child. So HN19's evidence is that was said. Are you quite sure that nothing was said in your presence, within your hearing, even a joke, albeit in poor taste, to suggest that one of the officers that you were going in to manage had fathered a child?
What can you say?
Did you hear anything to that effect?
No.
Thank you. That's a natural break in the question.
So that Mr. MacLeod and everybody can have some idea of how long he's likely to be required tomorrow. Are you able to give a public estimate?
It won't be much shorter than today, but a little shorter.
Yeah. But it will finish tomorrow?
Yes.
Within normal hours rather than extended hours?
Yes.
Yes. I hope that comes as a reassurance.
It certainly does, sir.
Good. Thank you for your perseverance.